Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Pebble Hill Presbyterian Church. We have an intimate crowd tonight, so people in the back move towards the front. You are welcome to do so. You will probably be able to hear better. Probably see better. I don't know. You might have great vision. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney Steininger. I am the pastor here at Pebble Hill Presbyterian Church. And for those of you who are less familiar with our building, I just want to let you know that if you are looking for a restroom, if you walk out of the sanctuary into the atrium and make a right, you will then be looking at the restrooms. The ladies' room is on the left, the men's room is on the right. Anything else that you all need to know? But it is a joy to have you all here, so I will turn it over to Monica.
Thank you. As chair of the Social Justice Committee for our presbytery, just want to acknowledge Sherry, who is here, and help with the contact to bring Osama Khalil with us tonight. And Joanne and so many other people have really publicized this. Many of the folks are live streaming this. So anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Osama Khalil from SU and the Maxwell School. And he wanted me to keep it short. But he was born here, but his family is in the West Bank in Palestine, and in a village that's near Taipei. And maybe some of you have heard about Taipei. It's the only Christian village left, all Christian village left. And I had the privilege of seeing that village in 2006, and it's amazing. I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but anyway. So no further ado.
Is this broadcasting okay? I tend to project, so okay, great. That one, hell? Will that work? Okay. So I would like this to be more interactive. I've got a few slides I'm going to show just to refer to, but really what I'd like is to kind of answer questions and build off of that. So let me start off by saying, if you've been paying attention to the news tonight, right, we really are standing on the side. And I'll talk a little bit more about that particular term, but it's now disputed. Right? There is no doubt about this. Okay? Every major human rights organization has confirmed this. There can't all be one. The United Nations, every single agency of the United Nations, UNICEF, all of them have confirmed this. The World Food Program. Don't know who the head of the World Food Program is? It's McCain, the wife of Senator John McCain. Not the most pro-Palestinian person in the history of the Senate. Okay. How's this? Can you hear me okay? So the World Food Program, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Doctors Without Borders, who I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And if you were waiting for it, earlier this month, B'Tselem and Israeli Physicians for Human Rights have both confirmed there's a genocide. Every major genocide expert in Israel, across the world, has confirmed this. Israel wants you to believe, and it's not just Israel, the Biden administration and now the Trump administration wants you to believe that what you see is a lie. That every major organization is lying to you. Meanwhile, they won't allow journalists in. And they're killing every Palestinian journalist they can, including 6 today. If you saw the video, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, if you saw the video of what's called a double tap, how many of you know what a double tap is? So double tap is one of these horrific terms that the military likes to use to cover up the fact that what they've done is commit a war crime. Right, so that's where we come up with these convenient terms, right, to avoid the reality it's a war crime. There was a strike on a hospital, itself a war crime. They hit a medical facility. And then they killed the first responders. That's the double tap. Boom, boom. This is not the first time. In fact, I'm going to talk to you in a moment in a way how I really wanted to frame today's talk, but of course there's a daily tragedy. There's a daily tragedy. These are 3 men. They're heroes, quite frankly. Some of them you may know. Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, orthopedic surgeon, one of the most celebrated orthopedic surgeons, not just in Gaza, in the world, was based in Shifa Hospital, the main medical facility in Gaza, which Israel claimed housed a Hamas command and control center. They even created a little video for you. If you remember that, we're taking you back to October, November 2023. And President Joe Biden, to his enduring shame, claimed it was true that there was a Hamas command and control center in that hospital. What was some of the evidence? And I say this not as a joke, but what they leaked to reporters was the Israeli show Foda actually episode showed there was a command and control center in Shifa. That was evidence. Spokespeople for the NSC, the National Security Council, the State Department, including Matthew Miller, who now is saying things he never said on the podium because he no longer has to. He's not getting paid anymore. All claimed this. And when it was proven that there was no command and control center there, they insisted it was. The Biden administration repeated what the Bush administration did in Iraq. All right? No WMD? We found WMD. And when the world said there's no WMD, they continued to insist WMD were in Iraq. The Biden administration did the same thing with every major hospital that Israel destroyed, and they covered for them. Worse than covered for them. Because I'll talk about in a moment, this is an American war. Make no mistake about it. But Dr. Bursh was arrested, not really arrested, abducted. How many of you know about his story? How many of you know who he is? Okay, this is going to get graphic. He was arrested and he was taken to a torture site where he was quite literally raped to death. He had been dead, we're not even sure how long, before the Israelis finally admitted it. And Physicians for Human Rights Israel has now finally requested a formal inquest into his death. The body has not been released. The most celebrated orthopedic surgeon in Gaza, if not one of the best in the world. That was April 2024. How many of you know who Dr. Hussam Abu Safia is? This is personal for me. I met him. He was the head of Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza near Jabalia, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Surrounded by Israeli troops, and he refused to evacuate the hospital. The Israelis killed his 8-year-old son. He buried him in the courtyard, and he refused to leave the hospital. When he finally had no choice, this is the last image of him, the last image we have of him walking towards that tank in his white coat. He's been tortured. We still don't know where he is or what his status is. His lawyers, periodic updates. And then we have this young man, 23 years old. The quote up top is from him, Rifat Radwan, a paramedic, who in the spring of 2025 was lured into, with 15 other ambulance drivers, lights going, lured into an ambush. They ambushed ambulances. The only reason we know about his story is because his cell phone survived. With the video, there's your shot. You can see the lights are going on the ambulances, clearly marked Red Crescent ambulances. And you can hear him at the end as he hears when they realize what's happening, and the Israelis start shooting at them, and then buried them in their ambulances. In which he tells his mother, "Forgive me." So I want to thank the Presbyterian Church. I should have started with this, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight and those of you who are live streaming in, because it really is very important that people of conscience in today's world, with the administrations we've had in Washington, whether it's Biden or Trump, and the Netanyahu government, that people of conscience take a stand. Because, yes, there are several genocides going on. There is Sudan. There are arguments about other countries which may be committing genocide, but Israel's genocide in Gaza is being funded by the United States. A study by Brown University found that up until October of 24, up until the election, the United States had funded 70% of this war. 70%. It's our war. But it's not just about money. The United States has troops, as you all know from the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, has troops on the ground in and around. Delta Force and other special forces have been operating and coordinating with the Israelis in Gaza. And I'll talk about the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in a moment. This is an American war. This would not continue unless the United States allowed it. And the policy that is being implemented of genocide, expulsion, and annexation has been signed off on. It is underway, and it's not just about Gaza, but also the West Bank. So these numbers, as I show you up here, are not accurate, but not like the Israelis claim. There's no overcounting. This is a vast undercount. There are tens of thousands, if not more, bodies buried under the rubble, just gone. If you know how the Israelis are bombing, bodies have evaporated. As I mentioned the last time I spoke at the church, and again, this talk will be graphic, and I apologize for that, but that's genocide. Dogs and cats are eating bodies in the street. Okay? These are the numbers that the health ministry can confirm. At least 61,000 dead. Now, you'll notice 18,000 under the age of 18. But keep in mind, Israel does not consider, especially male children, above the age of 10 or likely 12, to be children. They consider them adult males. They admit this. They admit this. Keep in mind, the United States is not any better. In Afghanistan and Iraq, 16 and up were considered combatants. Okay? The Israelis just took that number lower. Now keep in mind, the Israelis, some of you who maybe like me can remember the old days when the Israelis like to claim that Yasser Arafat would say one thing in English and another thing in Arabic. Every accusation is a confession. This Netanyahu and the Israeli leadership have down to a T. Because in Hebrew, on Israeli news channels, they are openly genocidal and say things like, there are no innocents in Gaza. There are no innocents in Gaza. Their words, not mine. 18,000 children that we know of. At least 10,000 amputees, some of them are double amputees. The highest rate in the world. Double amputees. And keep in mind when we talk about Gaza, what we're talking about. As you'll see in some of the maps, 365 square kilometers, pre-October 7, 2.5 million people. That number has now been reduced, but one of the most densely populated and poorest places on earth. And now double amputees. At least 18,000 orphans. At least. These are shocking numbers. To put them in perspective, think about the Carrier Dome. This fills the Carrier Dome at least twice over. Okay. As percentages of population. But this is a war of annihilation. It's not even a war. When you're targeting children, and as this slide tells you, just in the time we sit here today, in 52 minutes, and this number, by the way, is conservative, at least one child will be killed. I'll come back to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in a bit, but you'll also notice where the pockets come in, percentage-wise. When the Israelis are targeting children, a higher percentage around the tween area, 12 to 16. Okay? But it's almost evenly split between male and female, so it's not even like they're thinking they're combatants. Before I move on, and I'm happy to take any questions, if there's any questions about that. Yeah.
How would you distinguish between genocide and ethnic cleansing?
Okay, so genocide is a legal term. Okay? So genocide is a legal term. Ethnic cleansing is not a legal term. So I'm glad you asked. Because there's a specific genocide convention passed in 1948 in the wake of World War II. So ethnic cleansing is a term that was developed, quite frankly, in the 90s. Why? Because the international community did not want to enact the genocide convention because they would have had to do something about it. Right? Because as parties to the genocide convention, you are obliged to act. Right? You are obliged to act. But if you call it ethnic cleansing, like a double tap, if you come up with this phrase that makes it sound like something else, then you're not obliged to act. But they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can commit ethnic cleansing and genocide. In this case, let's be clear. So some people think when they think of the term genocide, they think it's the whole-scale destruction of a group. Millions of dead. That's not the case. Yes, number of deaths is important, but you'll notice what the convention says. To destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Right? That's the convention. But genocide is also about intent. Right? So you'll notice, what are some of the key components? Killing members of the group. So yes, death is important, obviously. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So when the ICJ and the ICC have looked at arrest warrants or have looked at the question of genocide, this is what they're coming back to. And part of it is about deliberate governmental acts, including, remember, what is the first thing, because I think it's a great question, what is the first thing the Israelis announced they were going to do in Gaza? Shut off the water, shut off the power, block any food from coming in. But keep in mind, Gaza has been under siege for 18 years prior to October 7th. This did not begin on October 7th. 18-year siege, in which, ignoring, even though you can't, repeated Israeli attacks and incursions, repeated assassination strikes, but also Israel managed the caloric intake very deliberately, taking us back to the Obama administration. There was a point of contention between the Obama administration and then Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Why? Because the Israelis wouldn't allow pasta into Gaza. Pasta. Because they were managing the caloric intake. What's the minimum amount they need to survive so that we can't be accused of this? But now, whether it's under Biden or under Trump, that no longer applies. So that's the difference between genocide and ethnic cleansing. One has a literal meaning in international law and is an actual treaty. Okay? You had a question, Dr.
I just wanted to add something for everyone to consider about the death count. The fact that it's probably wildly understated. It's been at 60-something thousand, I don't know, for the past many months, and it's almost certainly not true. So I read somewhere that military people kind of can calculate fairly accurately what the death count is. They take an area, on a map, they see the urban density, they split it up into grids, and then they see how much ordnance is dropped on each grid, and there's a mathematical formula that says, well, this many people die. And it's probably something between 300,000 to 600,000. And this is not even counting the deaths that are to come from asbestos and chronic disease that would happen had this war not occurred. So the other thing that struck me is I heard an interview by the former head of the labor union for Amazon. They went on a strike at one point. I forget his name, I'm sorry, but he went on a Gaza flotilla. And the Israelis stopped them about 60 miles offshore. And one of the things that he told me, said, not me, but was said on the interview really struck me. He said as soon as the boat stopped, and this was 60 miles offshore, they were swarmed with flies. Now, what must be going on in Gaza if 60 miles offshore you're being swarmed with flies? So I just wanted to add that for us to all understand that genocide is not just a term that's being thrown out. I mean, I think not only does it qualify in terms of the definition, but honestly, if you want numbers, I think unfortunately we have them.
Yeah. No, I think those are great points. Thank you. And I'll come back to Chris Smalls, who's the organizer who was abducted, beaten, held, and remarkably, the U.S. government said very little. And in fact, some of the key politicians like Bernie Sanders and AOC who had supported him with Amazon were silent when he was abducted by the Israelis. So just one more point on this genocide, and then we'll come back, which is this. The following acts will be punishable, and you'll notice C, public incitement, deliberate and public incitement to commit genocide. And that is happening daily on Israeli television. Daily. Not to include social media. Okay. So, to Dr. Ramsey's point, so this is, as you'll see, a map from UNICEF which tells you how much of Gaza has been shut off. So one of the things the Israelis are trying to do, and this is part of the plan and part of these successive negotiations, that the endless negotiations for a ceasefire, is recreating Gaza's map and making it much, much smaller. In short, making it impossible to live there. Because groups are being pushed away from these areas, and I'll talk more about anything near the border is gone. I'll talk more about not just destruction, but destruction of agricultural land and deliberate destruction, including an amnesty report that I encourage you all to read. And you'll see that they're being pushed on the coast. So this is an image from right outside near Gaza City on the coast. You can see people living in temporary shelters, almost right on the beach. Almost right there, if not there. And the point being, so now it's the summer, the Mediterranean Sea, which is wild, we're also going to be heading into winter soon. All right, the third one. Death, disease, and I'll talk about famine in a bit. So that number of 60,000 is most certainly not accurate. Are we at 300? Are we at 600,000? Entirely possible. So for those who are listening online, that was the question, and really the point that was made was based on different analysis you can look at, including studies in, for example, the Lancet Journal, including some admissions by the Israelis that they then backtrack, that the numbers could be as high as 300 to 500,000 dead. And you have a large number of Palestinians that have fled from Gaza as well. Okay. This is, if you can read it, and I'll walk you through it. On the left, it's produced by the UN on the number of damaged and destroyed buildings in Gaza by town. Okay? So, at least 100, almost 200,000 structures in this area. The largest, of course, in Gaza City, which is now being attacked yet again. Now keep in mind, Israel has not allowed foreign journalists in. All right? And has attempted to impugn the reputation of every single Arab journalist in Gaza. Freelancers, those who work for Al Jazeera or another Arab station, and when they can't impugn their reputations, they assassinate them. Like today. Okay? The reporters who were killed today were freelancers for the AP, NBC News. So a couple of reporters have hopped on some of these aid flights that have gone over and done airdrops, which I'll talk about in a moment, how minimal these airdrops are, how ineffective they are, and what this really is, and don't be distracted by it, because that's exactly what it is. It's an attempt to fool the population, to fool America, to fool people in Europe, to say we're trying to do something when really we're doing nothing. Keep in mind, 18 years of siege, the UN was managing aid convoys in. They need, at minimum, 600 trucks a day. More like 1,200 trucks a day to get in. They are at a fraction of that. And those that are coming in, as I'll talk about in a moment, are being hijacked, not by Hamas, but by a criminal gang backed by the Israelis. This is a deliberate theater. A deliberate theater. So, This is Gaza City. It's Gaza City here by the coast. This is Jabalia, which is just north of Gaza, for those of you who may know it. There's Jabalia Town and Jabalia Refugee Camp. They're both being devastated as we speak. In fact, one of the things the Israelis started doing in this most recent invasion and now quote-unquote occupation of Gaza is they are sending in robots that explode. So they're going into whatever houses may remain and detonating. So this is from several months ago. And again, Israel has announced that they are invading Gaza City and northern Gaza, home to at least 400,000 to about 1 million people. This is from the same UN group on agricultural land, how much has been destroyed. I'll talk about the slides on the right in a minute, in a second, the pictures on the right in a minute. So you can see the levels of cropland damage, what's usable, what's left. And this has been deliberate. This is the town of Gaza, which is here, right near the border near Khan Yunis. This is an area that the Israelis have designated their plan to siege. They plan to seize. So what'd they do? It's 11,000 people. And as Amnesty documented, they deliberately went in from 17th of May to the 28th of May and destroyed the remaining agricultural lands that were there to make it uninhabitable. Remember the definition of genocide I brought up. These are deliberate actions. Deliberate. And they're not being shy about it, which is to take me back to the beginning. When you go on social media and you're showing the demolition of houses as your soldiers cheer, the demolition of schools, there is not a university standing in Gaza. There were 11. They're gone. They're gone. This is deliberate. So when they go on social media and they brag about this and they show the videos, some of you may know this. Have you heard about the gender reveal parties they have? How many of you have seen these videos? Yeah. The soldiers showing gender reveal parties. In other words, one of the soldiers, his wife or partner is pregnant, and when they detonate the building, it goes blue or pink, depending on. They think it's a game. Part of this, to be blunt, is about a history of dehumanization of the Palestinians that's not just been in Israel, but here in the United States. 8 decades of dehumanization. Okay? Describing Palestinians as terrorists, as radical. All right. Benjamin Netanyahu has played into this since October 7th, talking about this as a war for civilization, a war against savagery. He tells the Europeans, we are fighting your war. You will notice when Netanyahu does certain talks or interviews, it's on Fox News in English. He's talking to a very deliberate audience. All right? And so what they have done is tapped into anti-Arab bigotry, anti-Muslim bigotry. They have erased. I want you to think about this. I'm standing in the Presbyterian Church. I'll talk about Taiba and other places in a moment. The oldest Christian community in the world has somehow been erased from this conversation. How? How? There are Christians in Gaza. Pope Francis called the Catholic Church in Gaza every night before he died to check on them. Pope Leo has continued this. That church has been bombed. So part of this dynamic is to tell you that this is a Muslim-Jewish thing, and it doesn't really involve us. This is a human thing. It involves all of us. So, I'm going to talk now about famine, because that's where we are. And I want to warn you, the same way you're hearing claims about there's no genocide, you're now hearing claims that there's no famine. And I'm going to encourage you to do a little Google game and look what the first result that comes up. Okay. You'll notice, remember I talked about the number of trucks that have to come in, the number of supplies that have to come in. If you can read this slide, I'll walk you through it. Here we are, January, February. You'll see the number of supplies coming in way above the minimum number that the UN has marked. Here's where we are in May, June, July, and August. You'll notice nothing came in March, nothing came in April. And how dramatically below the minimum it is. You're going to ask yourself, what happened in March? Does anybody know what happened in March? There was a ceasefire that Israel unilaterally ended. And then they prevented any aid from coming in for 2 months. And then minimum amounts coming in, below the minimum. And remember what I talked about, the groups that are hijacking this, fully backed by the Israelis. You say, well, how do you know they're fully backed by the Israelis? This is how. When they hijack the trucks, do you know what a quadcopter is? How many of you have heard that term? These are modified drones. Literally, it's basically a drone that shoots people. So when these groups, and Israel had a history of doing this during the occupation, remember, from 1967 to roughly 1994, if not 2005, Israel occupied Gaza. What they did was play your typical divide and conquer game. They identified major clans. And those guys, those clans, they gave smuggling rights to. Okay? Stolen cars, drugs, you name it. Their names are well known across Gaza. Everybody knew who those collaborating families were. And they weren't shy about it. They weren't shy about it. Why? Because they were the only Palestinians walking around with guns. All right? It's the same dynamic in the West Bank. Okay? This is what you're seeing repeated. They've identified an individual who, remarkably, is illiterate, but somehow managed to write an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. Right? Shocking. Okay. So you can see here, and you'll notice on the map, I don't know if you can really tell it here, there's an airdrop, but you see how tiny. It doesn't even show on the map, on the chart rather. It doesn't even show. That's how little has come through on the airdrops. I'll talk about in a moment what the United States and Israel have set up and how it's been described by Doctors Without Borders and others. So, to answer the question, we talked about genocide. I'll come back to it later again. What is famine? Famine is a specific term. So many of us have this idea of famine, maybe even taking us back to the 1980s with Ethiopia or Somalia in the 90s, and different famines since. Keep in mind, it does not mean the entire population is starving. It doesn't mean that there's not any food. It means that access to food has become so restricted and so expensive that large percentages of the population cannot access it. There's a specific classification for this. Where are we now? Right? Right now, according to the most recent report, and keep in mind, this report came out before this latest invasion of Gaza City. So what did the UN find? Gaza City itself, before the invasion, was not yet at a famine state, and North Gaza. Central Gaza was, and is. So, you're talking about here on these charts, when they tell you phase 4, phase 5, who has access to it, who has access to food, what percentages. Okay. And once you get into phase 5, as some of the physicians in the room know, even getting food may not be enough. It may be too late. Mass deaths start. Now, what did the Israelis and their disinformation experts started to do. They focused on pictures of kids, emaciated kids, and said these kids had pre-existing conditions. They didn't die from famine, they died from the pre-existing condition. It's a remarkable claim. It's a remarkable claim. It shouldn't be shocking, but it's a remarkable claim. Before I get to the so-called humanitarian foundation, any questions about the famine, about what's happening and where we're headed, including online? I'm happy to take questions from the online group. So as you know, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was created because Israel claimed that the UN could not be trusted to deliver food, something it had been doing for decades. It had the initial support of the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration has wholeheartedly endorsed it and funded it, $30 million from the United States. Now, as you know, the U.S. Agency for International Development was dismantled by the Trump administration. Right? This was Elon Musk's little project. Except they kept parts of it alive inside the State Department to fund this, which Doctors Without Borders has described as a killing field, a deliberate killing field. And they've said this is not aid, right? This is organized killing. So, as they describe in this report, here are the distribution sites. There are 3 of them. This is how they engage Palestinians to come in and go get the food. They have a front row for this. These health centers. These are MSF health centers. And as they tell you, from June to July 2025, they recorded at least 1,300 casualties, many who came in already DOA, dead on arrival. Right? Deliberate gunshots. We have witnesses, people actually, whistleblowers rather, who are coming out and saying, I'm an American serviceman, retired, now a private contractor, I took part in this, and this was organized killing. At least 2 whistleblowers so far. Deeply uncomfortable with what they've been asked to go do. This is not about delivering aid. This is about humiliating a population. You can hear, if you've watched the videos, them mocking the individuals. In the case of one of the whistleblowers, he had a young boy who thanked him for giving him food, and moments later he was killed by an Israeli sniper. But this, and again, on the GHF, this is again a deliberate part. The goal here is what? To dehumanize and demoralize Palestinians to such an extent that they will leave. That's the goal here. Make no mistake about it. Because the Trump administration and the Biden administration before them were very clear about this. So let me take a step back and let me explain something. Very early, and we're talking October, November 2023, under Biden, the Biden administration and U.S. Agency for International Development went out and tried to do a secret, quote-unquote, request. Samantha Power, who was the head of USAID, a Harvard professor, went back to Harvard and tried to get her colleagues to sign on to a project for the resettlement of something like 500,000 Palestinians in the Sinai. That's how word leaked about it. Because they wanted no part of this. Right? That was under Biden. Now, under Trump, as many of you have perhaps seen, the videos that came out, including his own little AI-generated video of the Gaza Riviera, and how he and his son-in-law and others have talked about changing Gaza, rehabilitating Gaza, without Palestinians in it. This is deliberate. And what they've been doing since is trying to find any country that will take Palestinians the same way, connected back here, that they are locking up some American citizens, but undocumented individuals, some with documents, and shipping them to El Salvador, South Sudan. The idea here is to send Palestinians, anybody will take them. They've tried Libya, they've tried South Sudan, they've tried Indonesia. They keep going back to Egypt and trying to bribe the president of Egypt. It hasn't worked. That is the goal. That is the goal. The complete expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. And to be clear, again, I talked about 8 decades of dehumanization. This builds on 2 decades from taking us back to George W. Bush, Barack Obama, the first Trump administration, and on, demonizing Gaza itself. Something I've written about as a badlands, as a terrorist wasteland, that the people there are irredeemable. This is deliberate. It's a deliberate dehumanization. Ask yourself why they won't let journalists in. What are they afraid of? Ask yourself why they're killing every journalist they can. And it's not just the journalists. Before I move to the West Bank, I want to come back to the story that I began with about Refat, the ambulance driver. A young boy witnessed this, told what happened to a reporter. That young boy was killed about 2 months ago, and the reporter was recently killed. That's what we're talking about. No witnesses. It's not an accident when every Palestinian who gets on social media, and I could talk about another Palestinian professor who was active on social media, active in the media, because he was an English professor, so he spoke English, so he went on CNN, he went on BBC, and he was active on social media, and he became a target, and he was hunted, and eventually he was killed with members of his family, and because that wasn't enough, they went and they killed his daughter and his grandson. They have killed, as we talked about in the beginning, physicians, nurses, emergency responders, teachers, professors. They've destroyed mosques, churches, museums, every single office building, including why would you bomb, ask yourself, why would you bomb Gaza's Central Archive? The Records Bureau, why would you bomb that? You're not just denying their humanity, you want to make sure that nothing exists for them to return to. All right? There's no papers, there's no documents. 1,300 at least, it's likely higher. Entire families, multi-generational families have been erased. They no longer exist. 1,300 and counting. Sorry, I think I hit the wrong button here. I want to switch briefly to the West Bank. So part of this, how many of you know the name Miriam Adelson? How many of you know who she is? Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson. So Sheldon Adelson was a casino magnate, a lot of casinos, but also the Sands, I believe is his baby. Major donor to the Republican Party, major supporter of Israel's settlements in the West Bank, was a big backer of Benjamin Netanyahu. and of course, then Donald Trump. So in the first Trump administration, Trump at Adelson's, either because Adelson wanted this or Trump wanted to keep him happy, agrees to Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, Syria's Golan Heights, recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital, right? And then begins an economic war against the then Palestinian Authority, part of which includes defunding UNRWA, the UN agency that's responsible for Palestinian refugees. All of that was at the behest of Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon passes. Miriam comes back, not only funds the 2020 campaign, but the 2024 campaign. And in return, the promise that she was, there's a speech you can find it where she talks about the first term, all the promises that Trump made, and she says, promises made, promises kept. And now what she wants is the annexation of the West Bank and Gaza. And keep in mind, Israel has been steadily annexing the West Bank, particularly since the first Trump administration, openly, after what he called the Abraham Accords were signed. The Abraham Accords were signed with the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain. All right? And to pay for it, it was the annexation of the West Bank. That was the trade-off. Now, the Emirates lied. The Emirates came out and said, no, we prevented the annexation of the West Bank. And then 9 months later said, there's nothing in the agreement that says they can't annex the West Bank, but maybe when the Saudis make a deal, they can prevent it. Not our problem. Okay? So what you've seen steadily since 2020 and the Abraham Accords through the Biden administration, but completely escalated after October 7th, is while the world is focused on Gaza, has been an unleashing of violence on the West Bank. Settler violence in particular. Okay? And this summer, they've had new targets. So, I don't know why this is doing this. You know how to, would that work? So this summer, one of the places that they've been targeting, including the village of Taiba, right, Christian village in the West Bank, has been those villages in and around northern Ramallah, north of Ramallah, which have a heavy Palestinian American population. Okay? Sinjal, Silwad, Kufr Malik, Thurmas Ayya, Taiba, have all been targeted. The village my parents are from, Mazar Shakia, has also been targeted. Okay? This is deliberate. Why? Because they know the Trump administration won't say anything. In the spring, they killed a young Palestinian American boy from Chicago, claimed he was throwing rocks. They released a grainy video that showed he was throwing rocks. They killed him, they shot 2 of his cousins, and withheld medical aid from them. The same thing they did to my own cousin 23 years ago, well before October 7th. The same exact thing. My cousin was a little older, these kids were young. They were young. They weren't 18, they weren't even 16. What did the State Department say? The Israelis are looking into it. We defer to the Israelis on this. There's a young 16-year-old Palestinian American boy who has been held on charges of rock throwing for 6 months in administrative detention. As you know, how many of you are familiar with this claim of administrative detention? This is a standard Israeli practice. They arrest you for rock throwing, administrative detention, they don't have to charge you. They have secret evidence and a national security court with a conviction rate of something like 98%. Okay? But that 6 months can quickly turn into a year, 18 months, etc. They can keep extending it based on that secret evidence and based on the same administrative detention charge. But Ambassador Huckabee has, other than a brief visit to Taiba, and he asked for the Israelis to take more care and then very quickly abandon that, the United States has done nothing to protect Palestinian Americans, much less Palestinians. Meanwhile, as you'll notice in the north, in Jenin and Tulkarm, the Israelis, taking us back to December, January, have been targeting those areas and copying what they're doing in Gaza, including airstrikes, drone strikes, destroying houses. Some 40 to 60,000 Palestinians are displaced. A preview of what's to come. But as you can tell, as bad as the situation is in the West Bank, and it's gotten worse, keep in mind, when the settlers come in, this is in complete coordination with the army. So what do I mean that they're coming into these villages? You can see some of the videos that have leaked online. They're attacking homes. There's no one for you to call. There is no one for you to call. When you can't call the Israeli army because they won't respond, the Palestinian Authority security forces only operate in certain areas and will not operate if the Israelis are there. Keep in mind, that's completely coordinated. When the Israeli army goes into an area, like in Nablus, on a raid, they will tell the security forces, we're coming in, you need to get out of the way. And they comply. There is no one for you to call. So they can attack your car, they can attack your home, they can attack you, they can kill you, which they've done. So, I was hoping there'd be a few more questions, but I can begin to write. Yeah, in the back, and then Pat. Yeah.
And when you mentioned the plan that Samantha Power had, when you mentioned the plan that Samantha Power had, could you explain that a little bit in the context of if a primary goal of Israel is expulsion, where does Israel think the people are going to go, and what is the role of or the perspective of Egypt and Jordan in that context?
It's a great question. So the question was about the leak about what USAID was trying to do back in the late fall of 2023. The Israelis don't care where they go. That's not our problem, right? In this case, the idea was about 500,000 Palestinians would go into Sinai, right? So I want to take you back a moment. I want you to think about the rationale, because some of this is not exclusive to the Israelis. We saw this with the United States in Iraq. We saw this again repeated with in the coalition fight against ISIS. An area is surrounded. This is what the United States claimed in Fallujah. We're going to surround Fallujah in Iraq, and anybody who doesn't leave is a terrorist. Okay? But keep in mind, some of you may be old enough to remember, this is not unique to Iraq, or this is what the United States did in Vietnam. That's where free fire zones were. All right? Quite literally, kill them all. Right? So from the Israeli perspective, what we want, this is the claim, right? And you can imagine how this would appeal to the Biden administration, which is out repeating that they're claiming this is a war against Hamas. How many of you saw that Chiron on the news, right? The Israel-Hamas war, right? And I'm going to talk in a minute about what Biden's ambassador to Israel just said in a recent interview. Okay, so the idea is 500,000 Palestinians go into northern Sinai temporarily, right? We will go in and clean up Hamas, right? And then they can come back. Sure, because nobody remembers what happened in 1947-48, right? The first Nakba. Nobody remembers what happened in 1967. Palestinians remember. They're living with it. Some are in this room, right? Because one of the first things Israel did, the state of Israel did, was pass a law that said those who've left cannot return. We don't care about international law. Those who've left cannot return. Right? So they don't care where they go. Go to Sinai, go. Now, Egypt and Jordan have a problem, right? Jordan especially, we'll come back to it. Egypt knows. You can give us $19 billion, but to take care of 500,000 or 1 million Palestinian refugees in northern Sinai, which has no economy. Anybody ever been to northern Sinai besides me? Okay. Northern Sinai has no economy. Rafah, the Palestinian city, has a sister Egyptian city. And for Palestinians who used to travel between both, they would tell you, we Palestinians from Rafah are shocked at how poor Egyptian Rafah is. Okay? Because the Egyptian state puts no money into northern Sinai. So for Sisi, he recognizes what this is, which is this is trying to displace a burden on him rather than resolve it. All of this, and I want to come back to this point I should have made earlier. All of this was resolvable. All of this has been resolvable not since October 7th or October 9th, 2023, for decades. But the individual who doesn't want it is the current Prime Minister of Israel. All of it. Who has bragged over and over again how he destroyed any chance of a Palestinian state. He's bragged about it. Okay? He's not made any secret about it. The only people who believe him are delusional individuals back in this country, right, here in the United States, who think, oh yes, there's a two-state solution that's possible. He's destroyed any chance of that. Okay? So to your second question, Jordan, 75% of the population of Jordan are Palestinians, originally Palestinian refugees or their descendants from the 1948 Nakba. Another group from the 1967 war. They know very, very clearly what the implications are if Palestinians are pushed out. They will never go back. Okay? But it's a great question. I'm glad. Thank you for asking it. Okay, I want to talk for a moment about Jack Lew, who is Biden's ambassador to Israel, because this takes us back to the beginning when we talk about genocide and covering for genocide. In a recent interview, he made the point that, there's been all this attention on the children who've been killed. But the reality is the number's too high, because some of these were the children of Hamas figures. Some of these kids that the Israelis bombed were the children of Hamas, so therefore, they don't count. If that's how the Biden administration viewed this, and we know that's how they viewed it, okay? A complete dehumanization. When the President of the United States is out claiming that there is a command center under Shifa Hospital, when the same individual claims that the death count in October, November, December was inflated, that was Joe Biden. Okay? Trump at least feigns for 5 seconds before he gets on social media and starts rage tweeting, feigns concern about dead kids, and then sends more weapons to kill them. Right? So I'm happy to take other questions. That's gone on a bit much. This is I'm sorry, Pat, you had your hand up before. Go ahead.
Hello, Pat Carmelli from Cazenovia. This is kind of a question to the people in the room. Where the hell are all of us? This is our genocide. As much a genocide perpetrated by the United States as Israel. And how many people are in this room? Where the hell are we? We should be in the streets. We should be marching. We should be demanding of our elected officials that they stop funding Israel. How many in this room have contacted Congressman John Mannion? He needs to be bombarded with phone calls every day. Sign the Block the Bombs bill. At this point, when this is being called a genocide and a famine, which is long overdue, any of our elected officials who are continuing to fund Israel are war criminals. And I want to see the Nuremberg trials part 2. I want to see our elected officials being held accountable. And I'd like to know, again, where the hell are we? Here's a room of mostly elderly people like myself. Where the hell are we? I'm sorry, take one more minute. When I was growing up, and I remember seeing the pictures of the Holocaust, and we all thought about it, and we said, we challenge ourselves. What would we have done had we been German citizens at the time? And we'd like to think that we'd be the ones sheltering Jewish people. And it's audacious to think that, because would we really be brave enough to do that? But right now, we're being challenged. And as we sit here, the few of us, to listen to the horrors, and we know about it, but where the hell are we? We need to be on the streets. We need to demand an end to this genocide and to this famine.
So just to pick up on Pat's point, I think it's also important to remember, you have outstanding warrants for Netanyahu and the former defense minister Gallant. The United States is not recognized. And keep in mind, you can blame Trump all you want. This takes us back to Biden, who said, there's no genocide, and we don't agree with the court. And we're not going to observe, in fact, we're not going to observe these warrants. And now they've sanctioned the chief prosecutor. But that's not alone, because multiple states, treaties, who've signed these treaties, who are supposed to be signatories, the United States is not, France, Germany, on down the line, have allowed Netanyahu to fly over their countries, have not intervened. Gallant has gone in and out of the UK. So, to Pat's point, we'd like to tell ourselves, sure, we would have hid people, we would have done this, we would have done that. I think what we're seeing is that's not really true. But I think what's really, in part, I've struggled with, and I can say this as someone from the beginning, when the very word ceasefire, or even calling for a ceasefire, rather, to rephrase that, calling for a ceasefire somehow was a radical position, told you where this was headed. When the Biden administration signed off on cutting power, water, and any food going into Gaza, because here's one of the things that has also come out. Two things on Biden, and I'll come back to Trump in a moment. Netanyahu had convinced Biden that the aid that was going to come in, Hamas was taking it over. Hamas was seizing the aid. And without any evidence other than what Netanyahu told him, Biden said, then don't let any in. The other thing we've learned from Israel's ambassador to the U.S., who has since given an interview and said, thank God Joe Biden was the president because he didn't put any restrictions on Israel. None. Now you'll remember going into the election, what were we told? Biden was working tirelessly for a ceasefire. Kamala Harris, we were told, was working tirelessly for a ceasefire. None of that was true. So what I'll end with is now, when they come and tell you, and I'm going to talk about the Google game I'd like you to do, when they come and tell you Amnesty International is Hamas, Human Rights Watch is Hamas, every single doctor that we've seized and tortured and murdered is Hamas, all the kids we've killed, they're all Hamas. When they tell you not to believe your own eyes, and we know they've been lying to us, we know they've been lying to us. Okay? When you go home, if you enter, or on your phone, look for the first sponsored result on Google. Look. Just enter this phrase, integrated food security classification. Enter that into your Google and see what the first sponsored result is. which is Israel challenging this. It's a sponsored result. Okay? Because they don't want anybody to think that what they're doing is a famine or a genocide. Okay? There's no other questions. Is that a question?
Two questions, please. How do these gangs manage to exist and not get killed when other Gazans are getting killed? Have they a special place they hide when the drones and all fall? That's question number one.
Right.
And secondly, I notice you have not mentioned the white Christian nationalists who play a significant part in wanting to see the Gazans decimated.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question was about how does who?
How do the gangs manage to exist and not get killed?
Oh yeah, no, because they're protected. So these gangs that are seizing the food, yeah, they're protected by the Israelis. So the quadcopters that I was talking about, those are Israeli quadcopters. They're protecting them, right? So what happens is the few trucks that get to come in, these gangs seize them under protection of the Israeli forces. They take the supplies and then either keep them or sell them on the black market at inflated rates, right? That's what the gangs are doing. Okay, so they're under full Israeli protection. That's why they're not getting killed. Yeah. So that's a great question. The question was, if you didn't hear it, was how are the gangs surviving? This is, so keep in mind, these are fully endorsed by the Israelis. Okay. Yeah. Now your second question was about the white Christian nationalists. So I think what you want to, it's a great question, which is this. The one way to think about it is you have the white Christian nationalists, which of course have this idea. It should take us back to the 1930s, quite frankly, 1920s, right? Which is, they have come in an interesting way to identify with Israel, even though they're deeply anti-Semitic, okay? But because at this idea of strength, right? And because white Christian nationalists have identified Muslims as this broader other and enemy. So anybody who's killing them is a natural ally. This is not that different from what we saw, for example, in the 1930s, right? But there's a more natural alignment I want to talk about, which is represented by Ambassador Huckabee, which is, and again, which is the role, for example, of evangelical Christians in the United States. And their predominant influence, for example, on the Republican Party over the past 3 to 4 decades, and a real alignment between them. And this has been cultivated since the 1970s, 1980s, really, by the Likud party in Israel, and Netanyahu has made a very particular effort at this. This is why I made a reference to this. When he goes on Fox News, he gives very different interviews on Fox News in English than he does in Hebrew, on the few interviews he does in Hebrew in Israel. Remember, Netanyahu is not popular. The war is popular. A large percentage of the Israeli population continues to favor this war and does not see anybody in Gaza as innocent. Poll after poll after poll over 22, 23 months has shown this. Netanyahu is not popular. Protests against him, etc. The war is popular. Okay? And here, now we are finally seeing these splits. So this is why I think the point about white Christian nationalists is interesting. But we are starting to see these splits finally. Keep in mind here, according to polls. And polls, you also, I say this, but at the same time, I want to throw a caveat in there. We are seeing only 8% support for the U.S. continuing to fund this war among Democrats. Only 32% among Republicans. That's dramatic. That's dramatic among Republicans, particularly considering how the Republican Party has shifted to become extremely pro-Israel over the past 2 to 3 decades, okay? But we are seeing, this is back to Pat's point, there is a huge division between the base, individuals who are here in this room, and our elected leaders. They're not listening to us. They are not listening to us, okay? Certainly not the Democratic Party leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, they don't care, okay? They are not listening to us. We need to make our voices heard, and we need to continue to make our voices heard, but that leadership is not listening to us, and the Trump administration is certainly not listening to us. But we have to keep fighting. Other questions? Go ahead.
For
I, I mean, I think Chuck Schumer has made it very clear where his priorities lie, and so has Hakeem Jeffries, right? I mean, this is not, and they're not even shy about it. Hakeem Jeffries certainly isn't, right? They're getting massive amounts of money from pro-Israel groups, but also from military contractors, right? I mean, keep in mind, we're funding, so as you may know, so let me take a step back. This is a side research area of mine, okay? So as you may know, in addition to the war in Gaza, for lack of a better term, for the genocide in Gaza, Israel has expanded into Lebanon, into Syria, and started a war with Iran, okay? But it bit off a little more than it could chew with the Iranians. Because the word that has leaked out now is that the United States, its anti-missile defense, the number of missiles it has, is at an all-time low, at a record low, and they're rapidly trying to restock those. And Israel's supply of anti-missile defense was almost empty if the war had continued, okay? And was also proven ineffective. Not that you could see that because of wide-scale censorship, not just by, I mean, you understand how this works with the media, right? So it's not just that they're not letting journalists into Gaza. Do you know that every major outlet, and this is not a conspiracy theory, you're welcome to Google this and fact-check me, it was online, every major outlet, the Times, CNN, all the big ones, any story related to Israel-Palestine or Gaza has to go through the Israeli military censor. Every single one. Right? And it's not just, think about how this war has expanded. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and then Iran. And every single one has to be cleared by an Israeli military censor. When they forbade images of missile strikes, when they were pulled off of social media, right? When none of the damage, or limited damage was shown. Why? So then Israel can claim, well, the Iranian missiles missed. They didn't hit anything of value. Except for the Mossad headquarters, except for the Ministry of Defense. All right? And then we found out who actually has a command bunker under a hospital? Who actually has a command bunker in a hospital? Not Hamas. The Israelis do. So every accusation is a confession. Right? So it's pretty clear, if you look at the amounts of money that go into Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, the vetting that goes on. How many of you saw Speaker of the House Mike Johnson? Where did he go? So you know he closed Congress early for the summer, right? Because they didn't want to release the Epstein files. So they closed Congress early. And Johnson and a whole group of Republicans and Democrats flew to Israel and proudly took pictures there in the middle of a genocide that they don't recognize. Okay? So ask yourself, as we head into repeated and another round of funding, $3.3 billion. I talked about the anti-missile defense, another $3.3 billion that we are paying for to send more missiles to Israel, and a foreign policy that, quite frankly, is an abomination. Right? Yeah. And then,
The evangelicals obviously
yeah.
continue with their campaign. Where is the rest of Christendom with regard to the plight of what's going on?
Well, so I don't want to paint, it's a great question. So I just want to repeat the question, which was about the evangelicals and the rest of Christendom. So I think it's a great question. And one of the things I want to be clear about is that I don't want to make all evangelicals sound homogenous, because we are seeing rifts within the evangelical movement. That not just the situation in Gaza, but the situation in West Bank has split this open. The rest of Christendom is outraged, I think. And I can't speak for them because I'm not a person of faith. But I mean, we're here in the Presbyterian Church, so this is one example. Pope Francis was very vocal. Pope Leo has been a little more vocal, but perhaps not as much as we would like. Quite frankly, I think we should see more. This is a moment of truth. This is it. This is a moment of truth. When the oldest Christian community in the world is being wiped out, when Christians in Gaza are huddling in a half-demolished church, this is a moment of truth, everyone. Right? And so it's not just about Christians or Muslims, because then I don't want to say that, because the Christian community in Gaza is being bombed. Everybody in Gaza is being bombed, right? When there's not a mosque where every mosque has been destroyed, right? So it's why to me it's a question for people of faith and people of conscience. To me, this should be easy. I know it's hard, right? You're afraid of being labeled anti-Semitic. You're afraid of being labeled a terrorist supporter. You're afraid of, you don't know the facts, right? And they'll throw some random event that happened in 1929 at you, okay? I get that, right? I'm a history professor. I hear this stuff all the time, right? Okay? Sure. But guess what? This is it. This is the moment of truth. Because if you're not going to stand up for this, then what are you going to stand up for? Keep in mind what the Trump administration did when they came in, right? They literally arrested students, one for co-writing an op-ed, which was kind of and God bless her, it was not even that radical of an op-ed. Mahmoud Khalil and others who were rounded up, right? Okay, to strike fear. And again, to Pat's question, who was hiding them? Turns out Columbia University was literally sharing information with Rice to come arrest these kids. Right? So, this is a moment of truth, whether you're a person of conscience or not. I mean, if you believe yourself to believe in human dignity and basic human rights, which the United States, quite frankly, the U.S. government, does not believe Palestinians have. Let's be blunt. You had a few, and they were very courageous, who resigned from the Biden administration to stop the genocide. Why? Because Secretary of State Blinken was not listening to them, was running cover for the Israelis, and was actively collaborating. It wasn't just that Blinken, let me rephrase that. Let's be clear, Blinken was not just running cover for the Israelis. Blinken was very proudly going to the Israeli War Cabinet. He is Secretary of State. That's not his job. He's the top diplomat. His job is to get a ceasefire and a de-escalation. Instead, what Secretary of State Blinken did was send a memo out to the entire State Department and all ambassadors, all posts overseas. There'll be no talk of a ceasefire. There'll be no talk of de-escalation. That was within a week of October 7th. And at that point, Hamas had already sent the message: we will turn over all the hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. That was on October 8th. So I want to come back because we haven't talked about it. So let's just be clear, because some of you, either you're afraid to ask or you're wondering, well, what about the hostages? Isn't this about the hostages? No, it's not about the hostages. Netanyahu has made it clear. He made it clear within the first week. He did not care about the hostages. How do we know this? He wouldn't even meet with the families. And when he met with some of them, he brought in some of his bullies to come and sit there and harangue them. The families of the hostages were outraged. But keep in mind, the vast majority of hostages have been released through negotiations. Israel has killed more hostages than it's rescued. Okay? So when someone comes and tells you this is about the hostages, this has nothing. If they wanted the hostages, they would cut a ceasefire and end it. That's the only way this ends. Because they're not interested in the hostages. What they are interested in is expelling and or killing as many Palestinians as possible and seizing the land. Go ahead and then
I just would like to ask a question, and I'll pass it. I've kind of been under the impression that the reason we support Israel so much is because of our Congress and any Jewish members of it. And I wonder if that's simplistic or if it's true.
Yeah, so it's a great question. The question is, so why is there such support for Israel in the United States? So it's a little more, I would say it's a little more nuanced, okay, which is that there is a deep affinity between the United States and Israel that dates back to the founding of the state and even before the founding of the state. So you asked the question about Christian nationalists. Christian Zionism, we can date into the 19th century, American Christian Zionism into the 19th century in the United States. It's something I've written about, others have written about. This identification with the Holy Land, the Bible lands, travel back and forth, right? And we see it among a number of key American presidents and officials, from Woodrow Wilson, right, to Harry Truman, and a number of others. So this dates back. There's also the post-Holocaust shame and horror, right, that saw Israel as kind of a redemption, not so much for the Jewish people, but redemption for Western sins, okay? And its own and our own anti-Semitism here in the United States and especially in Europe. Okay, Palestinian Arabs were not seen at all. Right? Now, what's remarkable about it is that there's been a lot of writing about, including from places like Syracuse, right? In New York, number of they weren't then known as Arab Americans, right? But what we would call now Arab American activists, professors, etc., who were trying to get the case of Palestine heard. And were having difficulty getting that heard. Why? Because the United States saw a broader strategic interest. How are we going to balance, right, relations with these new emerging Arab states, this is the 1940s, 1950s, and this new state of Israel, that we have agreed to help found. We've recognized it, bless you. We've recognized it. And one of the first things that happens after Israel's created is what the United States starts telling the surrounding Arab countries is, Israel's now a reality, you have to come to terms with it, okay? And so that religious identification, that affinity, that also comes in, right, is then matched by the fact that Israel becomes very strong, and the United States sees a natural ally as part of the broader Cold War and then post-Cold War there, okay? So there are a number of levels to this, of the affinity. And then, of course, there is, whether it's real or not, the perception of the power of the Israel lobby within Congress, real or perceived, there is that perception. I often think it tends to be in alignment. People who are elected see that the easier road is to be pro-Israel. Right? They line up with the United States on a number of key issues, and this is why we support them. Right? So there's a couple of different layers to it, and it's not just, and again, remember, for example, the number, I think you asked a question about like Jewish lawmakers, the number is very small compared to the much broader. I mean, we haven't had a Jewish president, right? Woodrow Wilson certainly wasn't, but one of the things that would happen with Woodrow Wilson is he has, for example, this religious idea, as he will put it, of restoring the Jews to the Holy Land. And we'll see that over and over again among different presidents, that they share that identification. Okay.
Hi. When you were talking about, hear me? Closer? Okay. You were talking about how Israel feels about their hostages. Can you discuss their use of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so the question is about the Hannibal Directive. How many of you have heard about this before? Okay. So the Hannibal Directive is, we believe it was implemented by the Israelis, I would say maybe about at least a decade or more ago. This was to prevent Israeli soldiers from being captured and then traded in eventual deals. So the idea was that the soldiers would be killed instead. From what we can tell, although it hasn't been as reported here in the United States, in Israel it's been reported on heavily, and other outlets overseas have picked it up, including the Australians, etc., is that on October 7th, multiple Hannibal orders were given. And it appears that the largest number, so you'll hear this number, about 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th, and Hamas killed 1,200, everything's linked to Hamas. And that now appears is not the case, okay? But keep in mind, so we know a mass Hannibal order was given. We know that they ordered that helicopters were ordered, etc., were ordered to fire on any cars trying to go back into, or any vehicle going back into Gaza with quote-unquote hostages, or even in some of the areas around on October 7th that Hamas had been able to to take over some of the different kibbutzim. More importantly, I think, so that's at the one level on October 7th, and then there's the Hannibal Directive inside Gaza, which is the killing of hostages inside, inadvertently or deliberately, but also soldiers that Hamas or other fighters have attempted to capture, and they have been killed. So we've seen this again and again. I think the bigger issue is this: there's still a lot we don't know, and the Israeli government refuses to do a fact-finding inquiry because it's going to be deeply embarrassing for the Netanyahu government. Because either they knew something was coming and did nothing, right? Or they were so inept on the day of. Either one is bad, right? But he is preventing, and that government is preventing a fact-finding inquiry, which is the one thing that, we could talk about. First is ending the genocide, right? And ending the famine and trying to save lives here and bringing an end to this horror. But one of the other demands should be somewhere on the line is, besides rebuilding Gaza, restitution to the families, etc., is a fact-finding inquiry and holding those accountable, not just for that, but for the war crimes and the genocide. I would love to believe that's going to happen. I would love to believe that's going to happen. I'd love to believe that the arc of justice bends in that direction. I'm afraid it doesn't. Dr. Ramsey, you had a question before.
So I just wanted to make a comment, maybe not so much so as a question, because there was a lot of talk about Christian nationalism and why we have this affinity for Israel and so forth. So first of all, I wanted to thank Pat for shining a light on the relative inaction and maybe cowardice of our community, and something I struggle with every day, believe me. So I wanted to shine a light on something else. I wanted to shine a light on the church. I assume most people here are Christians, and if not, welcome. But as a Christian, I feel comfortable to shine the light on a doctrine of theology that I think has been a heresy, quite honestly. And if the clergy among us disagrees, that's okay. But I just want to make the comment for people to think about. So this concept of chosenness, I think, is a terrible doctrine and has been misunderstood. And the problem with the misunderstanding of chosenness is that it leads to ethno-nationalism. And ethno-national states, depending on the pressures that bear upon them, at one point will engage in all sorts of crimes, including and up to genocide, which we see today. And so I look at the Christian church, especially the Western Christian church, and one of the things that I think happens, for genocide is you need two things. You need the language and to dehumanize people, and then you need a supremacist ideology. And I'm afraid that our misinterpretation of chosenness has supplied that supremacist ideology, right? And I think it's a heresy. There are multiple areas in the Bible that you can just superficially look at that tell you that the way we've interpreted chosenness, that is to say that God favors one group over another, is just false. The prayer of prayers, the Lord's Prayer, starts off with two words, Our Father, right? So right there, it sets the direct relationship and the proper relationship between a father and children. And good parents always treat their children as co-equals. In fact, even human beings who are failed spiritual beings are at their best as parents. And when we see a parent favoring one child over another, we think it's a monstrous thing. So how can we ascribe to perfect love, God's love, this notion that he favors one group over another? So this is just a very sort of brief study on why I think chosenness, as we have interpreted it, is completely wrong. And the problem with it is, again, it leads to ethno-nationalism, and it provides the supremacist ideology necessary for a genocide. And so when you're in church, I would ask that you reconsider what it means to be chosen, and how that affects this current geopolitical concept. Because I think as Christians, we have a large part to play in it.
Thank you for that. I wanted to add one thing to that, which is, and keep in mind, this also played a role in America's genocides, right? The same notion. And also this notion of ethno-nationalism, right? So viewing that dehumanization of others that we've seen applied to Palestinians, and not just Palestinians. We can look at, for example, the Vietnam War, and how the Vietnamese were dehumanized, and how soldiers were literally, this was inducted into this as part of their training, and when they landed. So this is very much not unique to Israel-Palestine, although those religious connotations are there, but this was also practiced by the American military over and over again at home and abroad. When we talk about at home, in the westward expansion, the role of slavery, etc. But we have a couple of questions, but thank you, Dr. Manson.
I have a question. You're in touch with students a lot, I guess. And obviously, in the beginning of this, there was a lot of vocalization, a lot of demonstration. It's been squelched, as we know. And I'm just wondering, generally, with respect to us all, we know a lot of change, needs to come from youth, from voices, whatever. How do you see what's happening on the campuses now that it's been hushed? Do you see anything? Do you hear anything? I just wondered what the climate was.
So again, there's not just one campus, right? I mean, so this is and I think one of the things to point out, so the question, if you didn't hear it for those online, was about the climate on campus. And what you've said is accurate, right? Which is that this has been squelched. And we're seeing a combined effort across multiple campuses. That's from at the campus level, and then the Trump administration now attempting to pressure all the major campuses with an initial hit list and then beyond to prevent this occurring again, okay? This is not new, right? I hate to keep going back to the Vietnam War, but remember, campus dissent, right? And then the crackdown on it, and, what came in 1968, for those of you who may remember, Nixon was elected. And he was elected in part on the campus protesters, right? The war in Vietnam, and law and order. What has Trump picked up on? Almost all of those pieces, right? So domestic dissent, domestic disturbance, and then a foreign war. I will say this about the students. Many are still fighting the fight, okay, in a way that I find very admirable, and they're also really angry at their elders. And by that I mean faculty advisors, campus administrators, in the same way you saw in the 60s, by the way, of this big generational split and divide between those campus administrators and older faculty and the younger group. That anger is palpable. The difference, there's a big difference here, which I'll talk about in a moment, and I'll get a little macro if you don't mind. In the 1960s, college campuses were growing, okay? What we've actually seen now in the combination with the Trump administration now relying on the DOGE cuts, particularly targeting National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and these penalties, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, okay, is now they're forcing austerity onto I mean, I'll be blunt. I never thought in my life that I would hear Harvard Medical School, Harvard itself, Duke, the University of Chicago, claim that they had 3 to 6 months of cash on hand. Okay? It's shocking. Right? Now, are they telling the truth? Faculty, we're cynical, right? Okay? Or are they using the Trump administration's threats to do something they've always wanted to do? Get rid of problematic faculty, get rid of problematic students, get rid of problematic programs, right? So the climate on campus is very uncertain right now. And they've watched ICE come in, both in the streets and on campus housing, and arrest students and try and disappear them, okay? And you have, for those of you who have been following, the government is now targeting all visa holders, okay? Particularly this idea that they're going to target international students because they're the most vulnerable, okay? And that has a ripple down effect. Because, the students, how the world looks to a 19 or 20-year-old is different than how it looks to me, right? But, they have parents who are putting pressure on them, et cetera. But some of them, they're fearless. I have to say, they're absolutely fearless. I've sat with more than a few, and I'm inspired by them, right? I remember what that was like. I have a different calculus now, right? But that hasn't stopped me from speaking out, but it's a different kind of thing. So I'm very worried about where this goes. But here's the thing, and this is the thing with the young folks. They don't need me to tell them about the history of Palestine, right? They're getting more from TikTok, quite frankly, than they are from one of my boring lectures, right? And that's where they're going. So that rift, that same rift we saw in the 60s, that challenged kind of the existing order, we're seeing in a way among youth now where they're saying, you know what? Institutions have completely failed us. The Democratic Party has failed us, right? The media has absolutely failed us. We don't believe a word they say, whether it's about Gaza or, for example, Joe Biden's faculties, right? So that rift, and I don't know how it gets repaired, has now been reinforced by what the Trump administration is doing, okay? And now, look, youth are not homogenous because we're also seeing a big burst, for example, in registration for the Republican Party and a decrease in registration for Democrats. We're seeing the Republicans are fundraising crazy. And we're seeing a Democratic Party, quite frankly, that's rudderless. And refuses to change course on Gaza except for a handful of elected officials. Absolutely refuse. And you can see some of those who are trying to prevent history and claim that Kamala Harris was going to end the war. She was going to do no such thing. She was going to do no such thing. Right? I'm not even sure we would have gotten a ceasefire like Trump got Netanyahu to agree for 2 months. So the rift I see emerging, right, is one in which that youth group has decided that they are stepping out of organized politics, or at the very least, organized politics in the traditional sense. And if they, and a shift towards perhaps other parties or perhaps another kind of politics. Right? They've certainly lost faith in key institutions. And I don't blame them.
Actually, I think this microphone is... Can't hear you. Actually, I want to make 2 quick comments. I hope... Oh, be recorded. Okay. Sorry. Yes, I can do that. Thank you. 2 comments, hopefully quick. The first is regarding what you're just talking about with the campuses. I think you have to look to the board of directors of the campuses. Most of them seem to, like SU, seem to come from the financial industry. They're not academics. And that might suggest why the universities have kind of buckled under the pressure. The second comment is that it seems to me Israel is a Western outpost in an Arabic oil world, an outpost of Britain colonialism and U.S. colonialism. And so much proceeds from these 2 realities. The U.S. has, I understand, lots of weapons in Israel in place, so they're close to areas where the U.S. feels it may have to discipline nationalist movements. It's a very handy outpost for U.S. militarism, which kind of inherited British militarism. That'll explain a lot of the affinity for the U.S. for Israel, I believe.
You know, thank you for both those points. I think one of the things to keep in mind, and I don't want to belabor the point about the university role, but you're right. I mean, this is a constant claim about kind of the corporatization of these universities, but they've always been corporate structures, right? It's not like they weren't, right? And it's not like this just happened. But the reality is there's always going to be a rift, and I want to be clear about this. There's always going to be a rift between administration, faculty, and the students, and how they view the world. Keep in mind, even today, and you're right, there are a large percentage, and it's, whether it's SU or any other university that has representatives on the board who are from the major Wall Street banks or some kind of financial industry, okay? But you also have administrators who came of age in the war on terror, okay? You have 20 plus years of dehumanization, and I can't emphasize this enough, and demonization of Arabs, of Muslims, and a closer alignment between the universities and the state. This is not an accident, okay? You're talking major research dollars, you're talking trying to send students after they graduate to go work at the major national security agencies, right? This is not just an SU phenomenon, it is across the country, right? There's a reason why when you look at that map, there's a map, a really good map after the Doge cuts of who got hammered by these major cuts. Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Almost a lot of, and many of them with ties to the federal government on a range of research, right? But that rift that exists between students, and on top of it, that pro-Israel bias, it comes back to your comment and the earlier question, that exists and has existed in universities for decades, that refuses to see Palestinians as human. Refuses. Okay? Where even the two-state solution, keep in mind, the very idea that there could be Palestinian self-determination was a radical idea, right? Okay? And now you're seeing it embraced when it is completely unachievable. Imagine that. Now all of a sudden, recognizing a Palestinian state when it is completely and utterly unachievable, when it was achievable, there was no pressure to do it. But that was a radical idea. It was a radical idea for decades. It only became mainstream. Do you know who the first president to talk about his vision of a Palestinian state? This will give you an idea of how radical that idea was. It was George W. Bush. That's how late we are. The West Bank and Gaza were occupied in 1967. George Bush was placed into the presidency by the Supreme Court in 2000. You all remember that decision, right? Okay? And within 2 years, he talked about his vision. Now, the problem with his vision was he was unwilling to do anything to achieve it, and everything he was doing for Israel made it impossible. But that's your first president to talk about a vision of a Palestinian state. Right? And keep in mind, in between, so from 67, Jimmy Carter's the first one who talks about talking to the Palestinians. That's 1977. 10 years, and then another 23 till you get there. And now it's unachievable. And in between, you have a war on terror in which the universities ran open arms to the state. How can we help you fight this evil? Okay? And so this scooping up of quote-unquote migrants, undocumented, this happened after 9/11. Numbers we're still trying to come to terms with. Was it 500, 5,000? Not clear. How many were sent overseas and renditioned and tortured back in their home countries? Not clear. Okay? For the simple fact that they were Muslim and may or may not have overstayed. Right? So the universities have not been these kind of agnostic figures in this. Right? I will add in this, they have a history of denying and targeting Palestinian faculty and pro-Palestinian faculty for decades. This is not new. There is a laundry list of names known and those unknown. And it works at a number of different areas. Number one, who gets accepted, quote unquote, into a PhD program? What do you go and focus on? How that gets guided and steered? Who is willing to work with you? And the many who are not. Okay? Who gets funded, who does not? And then in the off chance you actually get a position, right? How do you maneuver through that? So the universities, let's not pretend as much, and look, and I think the great example is this. Columbia is a great example. Why? Look, I come from Berkeley, which also loves its tradition. Columbia, which loves to talk about its radical tradition. What they won't tell you is this. In '68, when they expelled male students for being campus radicals, you had some administrators who then called selective service and said X, Y, and Z no longer have a student deferment. Send them to Nam. They don't like to talk about that story. All right? So they have that history, and they're not the only ones. Ronald Reagan ran for governor and then later for president using the University of California at Berkeley as his whipping boy and the campus protesters. All right? So that there is a history of this, and there's also a history of these institutions. You know, there's using basically now roughly serving as hedge funds and real estate, real estate portfolios. Education is a secondary factor. Okay? Yeah, and then I got to move on. Yeah.
I think if I were to make a third point,
Yeah.
if I were to have made a third point, it would have been to the effect that I think our U.S. culture for decades has been extremely Islamophobia.
No, this fits October.
Could be a commonplace.
It's exactly why you have, and when we talk about the culture of the war on terror and the Islamophobia and anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bias that has been pervasive, it's why after October 7th you have this focus on October 7th, but not October 6th or anything that's happened in between, right? Okay, but thank you. You guys want to go
Nearly
home?
9 o'clock. We want to say thank you so much for presenting.
I just wanted to say that if you all can read our Presbytery, those of you who are Presbyterian, our newsletter, there will be some information in it, not only for the October programs, which were in the last one, on Christian nationalism, but also upcoming on Christian Zionism. And so I'll be putting some things in about that as well. The other thing is that I was watching a movie and I got inspired, and I was thinking if there was a way for us to build on our General Assembly stated clerk who came out with a statement against the genocide. Well, she didn't really actually say genocide. She skirted that a little bit. But she's made a very strong statement about funding, the war and so on. But if we, and particularly if this church were to have your session, for example, send a letter to the stated clerk of our General Assembly and say, why aren't you calling it a genocide? Call her on the phone. We've got the phone number in our calendars. There's so much more that we need to be doing at this point that's positive and that's really encouraging people to step out, not to do things alone individually, but to do it collectively. And there's, you get more energy and power when we do stuff together. So I just wanted to say that. And there's so much more, and our justice team is going to be putting more in our newsletter, and we're going to try to get it to each of the congregations, because we don't think the congregations in our presbytery, for example, really know what our presbytery passed when the professor here spoke at our May presbytery meeting. We think it's just the people that were there. So there's more to do, and I'm hoping that you all will be inspired by, where the hell are we, that we heard. And thank you for coming. And I'd like to ask you to close us in prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us join our hearts and minds together, the time of prayer or time of meditation, whatever feels comfortable for you. Gracious God, we know that you are a God of love. And because we know that right now your heart is hurting. Your heart is hurting because of the division in the world. Your heart is hurting because of our conflict in the world. And your heart is hurting because your people are hurting. Your heart is hurting because there is genocide happening, because there is famine happening, because there are people in need. Help us as we sit in that. Help us to affix our eyes on you and what can become hope. Help us be moved to action. Help us to truly be your hands and feet in this world, dear Lord. Gracious God, remind us of all of our blessings, and may all those blessings remind us how lucky we are, how fortunate we are, and therefore how much responsibility we have to build up in your world, your kingdom, which is a kingdom of love and of peace, of healing, of wholeness, and of justice. Gracious God, we pray this all together. Amen. Thank you all.